Most cybersecurity advice online tells you the same three things. Don't click suspicious links. Don't open strange attachments. Use strong passwords. And look, that advice isn't wrong. But today, I want to talk about something different. A risk that has nothing to do with clicking the wrong thing and everything to do with a feature you've probably said yes to dozens of times without realizing what you were agreeing to. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. Before we go further, let me be clear about something. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. I'm not going to show you how to exploit anything, and I'm not going to walk you through any technical attack steps. What I am going to do is explain in plain language why a normal part of your browsing experience has quietly become one of the more interesting targets for attackers in 2026, and what that actually means for you. So let's start with the feature itself, because most people have never even heard its technical name, even though they use it constantly. Point 1. The feature nobody notices. Have you ever used an online tool to edit a photo directly in your browser, or uploaded a document to a web app that let you save your edits right back to the same file on your computer without downloading a new copy every time, or used a browser-based code editor that could open a folder on your laptop and let you work on it like it was a local app? All of that is possible because of a browser capability that lets websites request permission to read and write files directly on your device. In my opinion, this is honestly one of the most useful things that's happened to web browsers in the last several years. It made browser-based tools feel almost as powerful as installed software. You didn't need to download anything. You just clicked Allow when the browser asked, and suddenly a website could interact with your actual files. Here's a real-life example. Imagine you're using an online video editor. It asks for permission to access a folder on your computer so it can save your exported video directly there instead of making you manually move it from your downloads folder every time. Most people click Allow in about half a second because it seems harmless. It's just a video editor. What's the worst that could happen? The way I look at it, that half-second decision is exactly the kind of moment attackers have started paying very close attention to. Point 2. Why this became a target. What most people underestimate is that permissions like this were never really designed with worst-case scenarios in mind. They were designed for convenience. The people who built this feature into browsers wanted to make web apps more powerful and more useful. That's a good goal, but convenience features, almost by definition, expand what a website is technically allowed to do on your machine. In 2026, security researchers have documented cases where this file access capability was combined with other techniques to create a new kind of attack path. Instead of tricking you into downloading a malicious file, the classic approach, some attackers have explored ways to abuse legitimate browser permissions that a user already granted to a seemingly normal site or tool, using that access to reach further into a device than most people would expect. I do not think this is about being paranoid. I think it is about being prepared. The point isn't that every website asking for file access is dangerous. Most aren't. The point is that these permissions are more powerful than they feel, and most of us have gotten used to clicking Allow the same way we click Accept on cookie banners, automatically, without reading, without thinking. Point 3. How this connects to AI tools. Here's where it gets more relevant to 2026 specifically. A huge number of new browser-based tools launched over the past year are AI-powered: writing assistants, coding helpers, image generators, document analyzers. Many of these tools request the same kind of file permissions because AI tools often need to read your files to actually help you with them. In my opinion, this is where people need to slow down the most. When you're excited about a new AI tool that promises to organize your files, clean up your code, or edit your documents automatically, it's very easy to grant broad permissions without stopping to ask what exactly you just gave that tool access to. Security researchers have specifically flagged AI coding assistants and AI-powered browser extensions as places where this kind of permission creep is becoming more common, precisely because these tools are new, fast-growing and not always built with the same security scrutiny as older, more established software. Let me know in the comments if you've ever clicked Allow on a permission request without really reading what it said. I think almost everyone watching this has done it at least once. Point 4. What actually happens when this goes wrong? I want to be careful here because I'm not going to walk you through attack techniques. But at a conceptual level, here's what's worth understanding. If a website or a browser extension has been granted broad file access, and that website or extension is later compromised or was malicious from the start, it can potentially read files it shouldn't, or in more serious cases, write or modify files on your device without you actively doing anything at that moment. This matters because it changes the traditional advice we've all heard. Don't download suspicious files. Assumes the danger comes from something you consciously bring onto your device. But this kind of risk comes from something you already allowed, sitting quietly in the background, technically still within its granted permissions, but being used in ways you never intended. In my opinion, that's a genuinely uncomfortable shift because it means good browsing habits alone aren't enough anymore. You can avoid every shady website, never click a phishing link, never download a cracked movie file, and still be exposed simply because of a permission you granted to a tool that seemed completely legitimate at the time. Point 5. Real-world pattern. Trusted tools, untrusted outcomes. Something I've noticed covering cybersecurity news throughout 2026 is a recurring theme. Attackers are increasingly interested in infrastructure and tools that organizations and individuals have quietly reclassified as safe or just a normal part of the workflow. Backup systems, remote support software, browser features, AI coding assistants, none of these were originally built with the assumption that they'd become an entry point for an attack. They were built to solve a real, boring, everyday problem. And that's exactly why they work so well as blind spots. What I personally think is that this pattern is going to keep repeating because it's simply more efficient for attackers to find a widely used, trusted feature and figure out how to abuse it, rather than build something suspicious from scratch that people are trained to avoid. It's a lot easier to hide in something that already has permission to be there. I'd also like to know your opinion here. Do you think tech companies are doing enough to warn users about what these permissions actually mean before they click Allow? Because personally, I think most permission prompts are still written in a way that's technically accurate but practically meaningless to the average person. Point 6. What you can actually do about it. Now let's get practical, because awareness without action doesn't protect anyone. First, periodically review the permissions you've granted to websites in your browser settings. Every major browser has a page, usually under Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Site Settings, where you can see every site that has permission to access your files, camera, microphone, location, and more. Most people have never opened this page. I genuinely encourage you to take 2 minutes after this video and just look at what's listed there. You'll probably be surprised. Second, be more deliberate about file access requests specifically. A permission request for your camera or microphone is pretty easy to reason about. You generally know why a video call app needs your camera. A request for broad file system access is different and deserves a more specific question. Does this particular tool actually need to read or write files on my device to do what I'm asking it to do right now? If a simple online calculator or a basic text tool asks for file access, that's worth pausing on. Third, separate your browsing environments where it makes sense. If you're experimenting with new AI tools, browser extensions, or beta software, consider using a separate browser profile. Most browsers support multiple profiles, so that permissions granted in your experimental profile don't carry over into the browser profile you use for banking, work documents, and other sensitive activity. Fourth, keep your browser updated. This sounds basic, but browser vendors regularly patch how these permission systems work, closing gaps that researchers discover. An outdated browser isn't just missing features, it's often missing fixes for exactly this kind of issue. Fifth, if you're a small business owner or you manage a team, consider setting browser policies through your device management system that restrict which permissions employees can grant to websites, especially on devices that also handle sensitive company files. This is a case where a small IT policy decision can meaningfully reduce risk across an entire team. Point 7. A closer look at a hypothetical scenario. Let me walk you through a hypothetical situation, purely to illustrate the concept, not as a how-to guide of any kind. Imagine a freelance graphic designer named Sarah. She works from home, juggling 5 or 6 different online tools throughout her day. A browser-based design app, a cloud storage service, an AI tool that helps her write client emails, and a browser extension that compresses images before she uploads them to her portfolio site. Over the course of a few months, Sarah grants file access permissions to each of these tools, one at a time, always in the moment, always because she needed to get something done quickly. Individually, each decision made sense. The design app needed to save her work. The image compressor needed to read the files she wanted compressed. None of these felt like a big decision at the time. Now imagine that one of these tools, let's say the browser extension, because extensions are frequently sold, updated, or occasionally compromised after they've built up a user base, gets updated with new code that behaves differently than before. Because Sarah already granted broad file permissions months ago and browsers don't always prompt again after an update, that extension could now, in theory, access far more than she originally intended without a single new permission prompt appearing on her screen. In my opinion, this is the part of the story that surprises people the most. We tend to think of permission as a one-time decision tied to a specific moment and a specific need. But permissions, once granted, often persist quietly in the background, disconnected from the original context in which we gave them. What I personally think is that this permission persistence problem is going to become a bigger conversation in cybersecurity over the next few years, especially as more everyday tools become browser-based instead of installed applications. This is exactly why the permission review habit I mentioned earlier matters so much. It's not about distrust of any particular tool. It's about periodically resetting the picture, because the picture your permissions painted 6 months ago might not match the tools and risks that exist today. Point 8. Common myths worth clearing up. Before we wrap up, I want to address a few things people commonly get wrong about this topic, because I think clearing these up actually makes the whole picture easier to understand. Myth 1. This only affects tech-savvy people who use unusual tools. Not true. Some of the most popular productivity tools, design tools, and AI assistants used by millions of everyday Americans request exactly this kind of file access. This isn't a niche, obscure corner of the internet. It's baked into tools many of us use daily. Myth 2. If a tool is popular, it must be safe. Popularity reduces risk, but it doesn't eliminate it. Popular tools are actually attractive targets precisely because compromising one popular tool can affect a huge number of users at once, rather than attackers having to target people one at a time. Myth 3. Antivirus software will catch this. Traditional antivirus tools are generally built to detect malicious files and known malware signatures. They're not necessarily designed to evaluate whether a browser permission is being used in a way that's technically legitimate but practically risky. This is part of why I think permission awareness has to become a personal habit, not something you can fully outsource to a piece of software running in the background. The way I look at it, none of these myths are dangerous because people are careless. They're dangerous because they sound reasonable on the surface, and reasonable-sounding assumptions are exactly what quietly shape our daily security habits without us ever really examining them. Point 9. Where this is heading. I also want to briefly talk about where I think this trend is heading because it helps explain why I chose to make this video now. As more of our daily software moves away from installed programs and toward browser-based and AI-powered tools, the browser itself is increasingly becoming the primary interface between us and our most sensitive data. Our documents, our photos, our financial records, our work files. What that means, in my opinion, is that browser permission literacy is going to matter just as much as password hygiene did a decade ago. We spent years as a society learning, slowly, that reusing the same weak password everywhere was a bad idea. I think we're now at the very early stage of a similar shift, except this time, the lesson is about permissions instead of passwords. The people who get comfortable reviewing and managing their permissions early are going to be meaningfully safer than those who keep clicking Allow on autopilot. I'd like to know your opinion on this too. Do you think browsers should make these permissions harder to grant, even if it makes some tools less convenient to use? Or do you think the responsibility should stay with the user to be more careful? There's a real trade-off here between convenience and safety, and I don't think there's one universally correct answer. Point 10. Who is actually responsible for fixing? This next point is a little more opinion-heavy, so take it as exactly that. My perspective, not a settled fact. I think there's a tendency, especially in cybersecurity content, to put the entire burden of responsibility on the individual user. Read every permission prompt carefully, audit your settings regularly, understand exactly what every browser feature does. And look, I do think individual awareness matters, which is basically the whole point of this video. But what I personally think is that browser makers, extension marketplaces, and software companies also carry a big share of responsibility here, and I don't think that gets said often enough in this kind of content. Permission prompts are often written in vague, technical language that doesn't actually explain the real-world consequences of clicking Allow. A prompt that says a website wants to access files and folders doesn't tell you whether that means read-only access to one folder you choose or something broader. In my opinion, that's a design failure, not a user failure. I also think extension marketplaces could do more to flag when a previously low permission extension suddenly requests significantly expanded access after an update. Right now, in most browsers, that kind of change can happen fairly quietly. A system that specifically alerted users this extension is now asking for more than it used to would go a long way toward closing exactly the kind of gap I described earlier with Sarah's hypothetical situation. None of this means you should wait around for these companies to fix things before you start protecting yourself. It just means that when we talk about responsibility in cybersecurity, I think it's worth remembering that the design choices made by the companies building these tools shape user behavior just as much as, if not more than, individual carefulness does. Let me know in the comments if you agree, or if you think this puts too much blame on the platforms and not enough on personal responsibility. Point 11. A simple weekly habit that actually works. I want to close the practical section with one habit that I think is more valuable than almost any single tip I've mentioned so far, because it's sustainable, something you can realistically keep doing rather than a one-time fix you do once and forget about. Once a week or even once a month, if that's more realistic for your schedule, spend 5 minutes reviewing your browser's permission settings. That's genuinely all it takes. Open the site settings page, scan down the list, and ask yourself a simple question for anything you don't immediately recognize or no longer use. Do I still need this tool to have this level of access to my device? If the answer is no, remove the permission. Most browsers make this a single click. If you're not sure that uncertainty itself is useful information, it usually means the tool hasn't been important enough in your daily routine to remember granting it access in the first place, which is often a sign it's safe to revoke and re-grant later if you actually need it again. I like this habit specifically because it doesn't require you to become a cybersecurity expert. It doesn't require reading technical documentation or understanding how browser sandboxing works under the hood. It just requires 5 minutes and a little bit of consistency, which, in my experience covering this topic, is almost always more effective than a complicated system that people abandon after 2 weeks. Point 12. The bigger lesson. I want to end the practical section with a broader thought, because I think it matters more than any single tip. The way I see it, the internet in 2026 isn't really divided into safe websites and dangerous websites anymore, not in the simple way it used to be. Legitimate tools can be misused. Trusted permissions can be abused. Convenience features can become attack surfaces. That doesn't mean you should stop using useful browser-based tools. I certainly haven't. It means the mental model needs to shift from, is this website trustworthy, to, what exactly did I just give this website permission to do, and does that match what I actually need from it? Let me know in the comments if you agree with this shift in thinking, or if you think I'm overstating the risk here. I'm genuinely curious what people think, because this is one of those topics where reasonable people can land in different places. Point 13. One last thing before you go. Before I wrap up completely, I want to mention something that applies whether you're watching this in the United States, the UK, Australia, or Canada, because this isn't a country-specific issue. Browser permission risks don't care about borders. If you use a family computer, a shared work laptop, or a device with multiple user profiles, it's worth checking permissions across every profile, not just your own main login. In my experience, shared devices are one of the most overlooked spots for this exact issue, because permissions granted under one profile don't always get reviewed by everyone who uses that machine. I also want to gently push back on one thing before we finish. It would be easy to watch a video like this and walk away feeling like browsers are fundamentally unsafe, or that you should avoid granting any permissions at all. That's not really what I'm trying to say. In my opinion, the browser-based tools we've talked about today have made a lot of everyday tasks genuinely easier, and I don't think the answer is to reject that convenience out of fear. The answer is simply to treat permission decisions with the same level of attention you'd give to, say, deciding whether to give a stranger a spare key to your house. Most of the time, it's completely fine, but it's still worth knowing exactly who has a key and being able to take it back when it's no longer needed. If this video helped you understand online safety more clearly, like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief for more simple cybersecurity advice that actually respects your time and your intelligence. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below which permission you're going to check on your own browser after watching this: camera, microphone, location, or file access. I want to know which one surprises you the most.